Good morning and welcome to Bible study. So glad that you are with us this morning as we continue on both in our Party On study book here that is looking into the food, the fellowship, the feasting, and all of the fun places in the Bible. And what we've found is that even though sometimes there's fun at the table, there also can be drama around the table. And any of us who've had a family or been around other people at the table rather than just ourselves understand that as well. And today is also day 2 of Esther, where we are looking into this Old Testament character and her story and what a story that it is. And most people don't think of the book of Esther as revolving around meals and tables, but really the setting for almost all of the book of Esther is the meal. And so we look now into our second part of Esther, where we are in Esther, I believe it is chapter 5 this morning, verses 3 through 14. And a lot has happened since we got out of yesterday's story, and I'll update you on that in just a minute. But first I want to thank you as donors of Christ's Table for making sure that this morning Bible study and all the things that Christ's Table does as a ministry continues to happen. And so you can find out more about Christ's Table by going to christtable.today and visiting us there. You can donate there if you'd like to. We always send all of our resources for free to those who donate. And then I also want to encourage you that tonight here in South Florida, we are having a little gathering, a little in-person gathering for everyone in South Florida. And you can find out information and sign up for that one on that website right there. The next Sunday, we're going to be up in Cleveland. Don't have to sign up for that one, but you can find out all of the details about that one at Christ's Table today as well. And I'll thank you for doing everything that you can to be a part of this journey that God is taking us on, and what I believe is a journey that God is taking the church on as well. So when we get to this section of the book of Esther, what we find here is that Esther has now become queen to Xerxes, who is quite an individual, both in history as well as in biblical history. Xerxes is the king in Persia. Persia is a great, huge empire during those years. And Esther now is a part of that, but she's a little undercover because she is a Jew. And there is an individual who is second only in the kingdom to Xerxes, and his name is Haman, and Haman hates Jews. And so Esther is being overseen by this individual by the name of Mordecai. He's an older cousin, but he has responsibility for Esther, presumably because her parents and the rest of her family are no longer in the picture. And so Haman kind of makes it his Haman, the bad guy, kind of makes it his goal to expunge the world of Mordecai, Esther's older cousin, and ultimately all of the Jews. But the queen is a Jew, to which nobody knows. And so just before we come to our text for today, Esther has finally decided that she, and the Bible's word for this, is a Jew who has become queen to the great King Xerxes for such a time as this. But in those days, they didn't spend much time together, a king and a queen. And so Esther really has to make a decision whether or not she is going to advocate on behalf of her people. And doing so may actually mean she loses her life. So she approaches the king in order to begin to unfold who she is and to begin to ask for the safety of her people. And the king gives her an audience. He lets her come in. He lowers his scepter, which means that she's safe. You did not come into the inner court of a king without being invited, or else you would lose your life, even if you were queen. But clearly, King Xerxes has a deep love for Esther that goes beyond just a physical relationship. So he asks her, what do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? He can tell that since she has come to him during this moment where she is not promised any safety, that she must have something very heavy that is weighing on her in order to risk her life, in order to have an audience with him in this moment. So what's your request? And in order to perhaps put her a bit at ease and to show her how much she truly is loved, he says, I will give it to you, whatever your request is, even if it is half the kingdom. Now this is just kind of a saying, not as though he would give half his kingdom, but we have on record in history many people who would say this. It was a saying of kindness or a saying of importance, saying, I'll do anything that I can for you. So Esther replies, if it please the king, and she doesn't reveal yet to him that she is Jewish, and she doesn't yet reveal to him her primary request, that she is seeking the safety of the Jewish people. So instead what she does is this: if it please the king, let the king and Haman, who is the second guy and the bad guy in the whole story, come today to a banquet that I've prepared for the king. Today. Fascinating, because, well, I'm sure that the king had many things to do, but Esther has prepared a calculated feast for the king, and he invited her to his banquet, and now she is inviting him and Haman to one of hers, which must really stroke Haman's ego to be the only two individuals in the kingdom invited for an audience and a banquet with the king. So the king turned to his attendants and said, tell Haman to come quickly to a banquet as Esther has requested. So the king and Haman indeed went to Esther's banquet. And while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, now tell me what you really want. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom. Here is Esther's moment. Here is her opportunity to tell the king who she is, and also to let the king know that she is advocating on behalf of the Jewish people, and further that this Haman guy is essentially out to trick the king into executing a BC Holocaust on the Jewish people. This would mean the wiping out of her people. It would mean the death of Mordecai. It would also mean her death as well. And so this is a bold request, because it is essentially the king going back on a decree that he did not know was going to have this effect on Esther. And he probably didn't care about the Jewish people. The decree, if I remember correctly, was that you could bow down to no one other than Xerxes. And of course, Mordecai and the Jews are bound by command to only bow down to God, not to bow down to other people. So here is Esther's moment to tell her request and to let the king know that Haman has tricked him for his own evil purposes. So here's Esther's reply. This is my request and my deepest wish. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet. So I'm resisting the urge to make a joke here about gender and hiding the real problem, or hiding what they want behind something. We all do this. I know that oftentimes in culture and social situations, women get the blame for dragging things like this out. But we all do this. Why Esther does this, though, is both known and unknown. In those days, it would have been relatively common for her to not immediately give her request in a situation like this, to raise the importance of it by there being a delay, by giving time for the king to perhaps soften. Obviously, here the king is remembering, hopefully, how much he likes her. I'm not sure that there was love, but it sounds like there was love there. The relationships in these days between people are very different. Women, even the queen, would have been seen essentially as property. There was no need for there to be a loving relationship between them. Women, unfortunately, were commodity. And so the fact that there seems to be something deeper here is useful and helpful to Esther, but also unusual. So she asked him to come back to a banquet on the second day. She says, I will prepare for this banquet for you, and then I will explain what all of this is about. Now, interestingly, the text tells us that Haman was a very happy man as he left the banquet. This has stoked his pride and his ego to first have been invited to this first banquet, but now he is feeling very, very important that this private banquet that she is going to prepare for them is the second day, is obviously a very closed meeting that is now that she has raised the ante on this special request. Haman is going to be there for this, and he's probably thinking, I am on the inside, I'm on the inner circle, I am great and powerful, second only to the king, and he knows that he can woo the king because he already has into what he wants the king to do. And now he's going to have this piece of information, this request, whatever it is. And this could be very valuable for him to have this firsthand. But when Haman sees Mordecai, Esther's older cousin, who is her guardian, and also the person in the story who Haman loathes, sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or not trembling nervously before him, Haman becomes furious. How could this individual not bow to me, not treat me with deference? And he has been so inflated by this meeting and his feelings of being here in this special moment between Xerxes and Esther that it makes him all the more furious and filled with rage that anyone would have the audacity to question his gratefulness and his powerfulness. And essentially, kings were seen as divinity, as gods, and Haman certainly sees himself as a god, or as important as a god as well. But he restrains himself in that moment and goes on home. Then Haman gathered together his friends and his wife, and he boasted to them about his great wealth and his many children. It doesn't take a smart man, or it doesn't take a wise man to be rich or to father children. And the fact that this is what Haman chooses to boast about means that he probably doesn't have what he wants. And people usually who attain what they're able to attain oftentimes still have this emptiness because it doesn't fill the deepest places in the soul. And so Haman has great wealth and he has many children. He's still not wise, but he doesn't still have what he wants. And what he thinks he wants is power. What he thinks he wants is control. What he thinks he wants is for everyone to think he is great. Probably because he has a self-esteem problem. So many people who have a need for power and control, who have egos the size of Suburbans, have egos because it is a cover-up for a lack of self-esteem. And I think there's not too much self-diagnosis here going on. No armchair psychologist here that wouldn't say that this is a self-esteem problem, and Haman has an extreme self-esteem problem, and he's filling it with the wrong thing. And what it does is it causes people to treat him. It causes him to treat people in ways that are ungodly because he wants to be treated like a god. It's just sad when that happens. It's just sad. So he brags about the honors the king had given him. To whom? Why did he invite his friends over? He needed someone to stroke his ego. So he invites those into his home because Mordecai didn't stroke his ego. He invites those who will. So he brags about the honors that the king had given him and how he had been promoted over all of the other nobles and officials. And they're probably saying, yes, Haman, you're deserving of this. Yes, Haman, you're amazing. Yes, Haman, I can't imagine why Mordecai or any other person wouldn't be able to see that. And they're speaking all of these things into his ear. And it's dust in the wind. And yet it's feeding a part of Haman's soul that he needs fed. But it's never enough, the adulation of others. Haman added, and that's not all. Queen Esther invited me and the king himself to the banquet that she prepared for us, and she has invited me to dine with her and the king again tomorrow. And so now he's encouraging them to think of how important that he is, and he's excited about this banquet, but he doesn't understand that the acceptance of his attendance at this banquet will probably not be good for him because of the request. So he adds, but this is all worth nothing, and here it is, as long as I see Mordecai the Jew just sitting there at the palace gate. No amount of wealth, no number of children, no size of a family, no marriage, no friends who are willing to stroke your ego and make you feel as though you are the next Catholic saint is going to be enough for someone whose self-esteem is so low that a single individual who does not think that the world revolves around them means nothing compared to everything that they have. And so Haman is willing to set aside and risk all of the good things that he has because his ego is so fragile as to allow one person who sits at a gate rather than bows to him, a meaningless individual. It's a tragic tale, but it's a tragic tale that so many of us live because we do the same things. We make our decisions and guide our lives on the basis of one or two people who offend our fragile egos. And it ends up costing Haman greatly. And it does you and I as well. So Haman's wife, Zeresh, and all of his friends suggest this. If there's only one person who doesn't think you're a saint, Haman, clearly they're wrong because you're a saint, Haman. So why don't we just expunge that person from the earth? It is a nobody. You, though, you are a somebody. This is feeding his ego now. So all of his friends suggest set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall, and in the morning ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. Essentially, probably the king will have to because he's breaking the law that the king set. So when this is done, you can go on your merry way to the banquet with the king. This pleased Haman, so he ordered the pole set up. Now the story goes on from there, and I will encourage you, if you wish, to go ahead and read the story and see what happens. It is fascinating and it is interesting what happens here. But a few things. First of all, Esther finds her courage at the table, which I think is important. Now, why do I say that? I say that because in chapter 4, the entirety of the chapter before what we've just read is Esther really kind of waffling on whether or not she has the courage in order to risk her life on behalf of her people. Esther isn't certain that it will work for her to go to the king and let him know what's happening behind the scenes with Haman, because in so doing, she's going to have to reveal the fact that she is a Jew as well. And if the king, Xerxes, really truly has it in for the Jews, Holocaust BC, then she's gaining nothing, and she's also losing her life. And so I think that Esther inviting the king to a banquet at her table, not once but twice, is Esther maybe kicking the ball down the field a little bit and finding her courage. And Esther does end up finding her courage at the table. And generally, I think that we do as well. As we've said, we find God at the table. We find ourselves at the table. And I also believe that we find courage to do what God has asked us to do at the table as well. It's why the table is so central in the kingdom of God. Why God asks us to, every time we're at the table, remember me. Every time you eat bread, every time you drink from the cup, remember me. Why? Because that gives us the courage, the ability to actually be the people who God has created us to be. It's not simply because Jesus needs to be remembered that he's fearful of being forgotten. No, there has to be more to it than that. Esther found courage at the table, and we find courage as well to live for God and to do the things that God has called for us to do. It's not false courage just from drinking too much wine, though sometimes, I don't know, maybe it is. Tomorrow's sermon actually is going to be about drinking far too much wine. 11 a.m. right here, Eastern. But did I say 11 a.m.? 9:45 a.m. right here, Eastern. But we find courage, we find ourselves, and we find God at the meal, at the table. And so that's the courage that we find at the table, because we find God at the table and we find ourselves in relation to God at the table. Second, Esther uses the table as an opportunity to align herself with God's people. Esther essentially uses the table as the location or the place where she is going to reveal who she really is and who she is connected to. And I just love this because so many people have been, bounded into their head. Evangelism. You have to go evangelize. You have to witness. You have to save souls. The 4-step plan, of leading people to Jesus Christ, of saving people from hell. And this idea, this fundamentalist legalistic idea of how we are supposed to act and how people come to faith is, first of all, a broken system anyway, but it also just isn't natural. Some people are gifted at being salesmen or saleswomen. Some of us those aren't our gifts. But there's something that happens at the table. Inviting people to the table is super easy. Inviting people to a meal is super easy. Listening to the stories of others and the journey that God has taken them on in their life, even if they don't see it as being God, we see God and his fingerprints in each and every person's story, no matter who they are or where they are. And then being able to share a bit about your story and about your faith, if it comes up, is an opportunity for you to align yourself with God and with God's people. There's no better place than over food, than at a table, for you to recognize that you're a child of God and to align yourself with God. Remember, the table is God's. He's all about hospitality and serving meals. Again, I said the Lord's Supper. He's told us over and over and over again. Heaven is pictured as being a worshipful feast. the marriage supper of the Lamb, it's called. So he's given us all the clues and all of the help for us to see the most powerful place for us to live for God is at the table. And Esther uses this as an opportunity. And we see that where she essentially comes out of the closet as a Jew at the table. This is the location. She finds her courage to do that there, and she aligns herself with God's people there. And that may be the best place for you to do so as well. And finally, sometimes good things at the table take time. Esther doesn't immediately come out with her need. The problem isn't immediately solved. In fact, it's going to take a couple of days, right? She invites him there for the first time. She invites him back a second time for another banquet. And sometimes we want every relationship to be repaired immediately at the table. Sometimes we want everybody who sits at our table to immediately understand who we are, what we're about, and our faith. And sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes building a relationship with other people. Sometimes it takes you learning a lot more than you can learn in one meal about the person whom God has said, you know what, this is somebody I want you to invest in. So don't expect one meal to accomplish everything that God has for you to accomplish. It may take multiple feasts. So get your forks and knives out, right? Till tomorrow.